You can watch a pharaoh conquer twice, first with armies, then with ink. For 3,000 years, Egypt turned pictures into power, hawks that could speak, eyes that could count grain, and silent signs that stopped you from reading the wrong word. Then, the language went dark. Priests forgot, tourists guessed, scholars argued across centuries, until a shattered black slab lifted from a Nile-side trench bound 3 scripts into one voice and proved the pictures could sing. Hieroglyphics were never decoration, they were infrastructure. They crowned kings, audited granaries, scheduled festivals, stamped borders, and flirted in the margins. In this video, we'll untangle how the system works, sounds, symbols, determinatives, why the chain of teachers broke, and how it was pried open again so work crews, queens, and school kids speak to us across millennia. Stay to the end. You'll hear a tiny Egyptian sound that never died, a whisper you still make without thinking. This is Armchair Archaeology. Catch the echo, hiding in plain speech.
Walk up to a wall of hieroglyphics, and it looks like a pageant. Falcons, eyes, lotus blooms, royal names sealed in rope. Treat it like art, and you miss the point. This isn't decoration, it's statecraft, prayer, bookkeeping, gossip. It's the operating system of a civilization that needed to crown a king at dawn and settle a cloak dispute by dusk. The pictures carry more than beauty. They fix borders, time festivals, list wages, bless grain silos, flirt in the margins. A temple facade becomes an audible ceremony. A papyrus becomes a lawsuit, a hymn, a delivery receipt. The same system that can summon gods can also total beer jars for a quarry grue. That range is the giveaway. We're dealing with the language that chose images as its tools, not images that occasionally pretend to be language. Because it worked everywhere, people learned to read it everywhere. Palace, workshop, harbor, shrine. Literacy didn't belong only to sculptors. It ran through scribal schools and offices where the right line could change pay or policy. Even the layout pushes meaning. Lines and columns balance figures like choreography. A king addresses a god, priests answer in smaller scale, captions cue you to who speaks and when. Stone isn't still. It stages a voice. The surprise isn't that Egypt wrote with pictures. The surprise is how flexible those pictures became in lived use. They could carry royal ambition in gold leaf on granite, and then turn around and handle a neighborhood delivery. No switch of language required. Just a shift of register. That's why the walls feel theatrical, and the ostraka feel intimate. One system tuned to the venue. Soon we'll watch the same language change outfits. Formal for monuments, flowing for priests, quick for clerks. But the core truth starts here. What looks like a gallery is a city speaking.
Monuments keep the spotlight. Crisp hieroglyphs staged like ceremony. Treat that as the whole story, and you miss where Egyptian really lived. On papyrus, wood, and potsherds, or a brush had to keep pace with a mind. The same language learned to move faster. Hieratic streamlines the shapes you see on stone in the flowing strokes. It's hieroglyphic with its sleeves rolled up. Priests copy rituals in it. Administrators tally rations. Storytellers glide through fables. Later, Demotic tightens further. Quicker, sharper, perfect for court cases, receipts, and neighborhood letters. One day's work might cross all 3. A scribe carves a king's name in hieroglyphs at dawn, drafts a temple account in hieratic by midday, then finalizes a lease in demotic after dusk. Different textures, same grammar. Even the direction suits the hand. Hieroglyphs face the way you should read on a wall, while hieratic and demotic settle into right-to-left lines that let a right-handed scribe pull ink cleanly without smearing. The page collaborates. Calling them different alphabets misses the intimacy between them. Hieratic borrows its bones from hieroglyphic. Demotic borrows from hieratic. Names, titles, and common words echo across forms, and you can watch a bird become a swift curve, then a compact flick, without losing its job in the sentence. Change the outfit, not the language. One inscription makes the point better than a lecture. A single decree appears in hieroglyphic for temple and state, in demotic for daily business, and in Greek for the ruling administration. 3 scripts carry one message to 3 audiences. That's not ornament, that's infrastructure. Government, worship, and commerce sharing a communications network. Think of it this way. Hieroglyphic is the formal robe. Hieratic is the working tunic. Demotic is the street jacket. Different fabrics, same body underneath, moving through palace, archive, and marketplace without changing who it is. Stone grabs the headlines, but most Egyptian writing lived where hands could move fast. Papyrus sheets, wooden boards, and broken odds and ends turned into scratch paper. So the toolkit had to be portable, cheap, and precise. A scribe's palette, usually wood, held 2 inkwells, black for the main text, red for headings, names of gods and kings, corrections, and warnings. Black came from soot bound with gum, red from iron-rich ochre. Add water, stir, and the pigment woke up. Reeds, cut from marsh plants, were chewed to a brushy tip. You can almost hear the soft rasp as they pull ink across fiber. Papyrus made long, smooth pages for letters, accounts, and literature, but the day-to-day overflow landed on ostraca. Flakes of limestone, sharded beer jars, even bits of bowls. So a workman at Deir el-Medina could jot a ration list on a white flake, flip it over for a love note, and pass it along. The notepad was whatever broke last. Training shaped more than handwriting. Boys in scribe schools copied model texts, hymns, legal formulas, and the famously smug Satire of the Trades, which insists every job is misery except being a scribe. But this was more than snobbery. Literacy opened doors to temple offices, courtrooms, and payrolls, and often spared you heavy labor. So penmanship became class mobility, and your ductus, your stroke habits, could be as identifying as a signature. This was the ancient world's learn-to-code moment. Literacy wasn't just about reading, it was an economic ladder, the clearest path to escape a life of hard labor for a white-collar job in a temple or courtroom. Colors weren't decoration. A column might start in black, then pivot to red for a divine name or a new section, steering the eye like road signs. But speed and correction lived in the margins too, squeezed additions, scratched out lines, a blot where the reed split. So we can watch a human hand at work, complete with hurry and second thoughts, and sometimes even track the same scribe across years by the quirks of his strokes. From soot and reeds to limestone chips, the machinery of writing was simple, robust, and everywhere, ready to crown a king on papyrus or remind someone to return a borrowed cloak on a potsherd. A line of hieroglyphs isn't a picture caption. It's a sentence built from 3 kinds of building blocks that cooperate. Some signs carry sounds, some stand for whole words, some are silent labels that steer meaning. Sound signs come in different sizes. A reed leaf often gives the sound I or Y. A quail chick gives W or oo.
A mouth gives R. Others bundled 2 or 3 consonants at once. A beetle can carry the sound of chapur, the idea to become, and still participate in a longer word when needed. Whole word signs do what they look like. The sun disk can mean sun, a throne can mean throne. Then come the quiet guides at the ends of words, determinatives. They don't speak, but they sort. A seated figure marks a person. A papyrus roll marks a document. City walls mark a place. Put the same spelled sequence before a papyrus roll and you'll read contract. Before a city wall, you'll read town. Precision without extra noise. Scribes add another nudge, tiny phonetic complements, little echoes that repeat part of a word after a big sign. They confirm how a reader should hear it, which is crucial in a script that usually leaves vowels off the page. A powerful sign can carry most of a name or verb. The small echoes lock it in, so you're not guessing. This is why we can actually read Egyptian today instead of just guessing. The system leaves breadcrumbs. Direction works like stage blocking. Figures face the start of the line, so you read into their gaze. Birds looking right? Begin on the right and move left. Columns can run top to bottom. The art teaches you how to proceed. Once these pieces click, the script turns agile. Poetry leans on double meanings. A sign can serve as a word in one breath and as a sound in the next. Law needs clarity, so determinatives and red headings keep sections straight. A love note borrows the same toolkit to make a metaphor unmistakable. Pictures aren't pretending to be language, they are the language, spoken by signs that know when to sing and when to keep still. For example, if you see the scarab beetle sign, it can mean the verb to become. The scribe can then add a couple tiny helper signs after it to tell you exactly how to pronounce it in that sentence. So you're not guessing. The script actively steers you towards the right meaning. If you had to live under that system, which would you trust more? The picture that can hold layers of meaning, or the little phonetic echoes that pin it down? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious whether you'd rather live in poetry or in precision.
Now scale that up. Those same building blocks don't just spell words, they choreograph entire walls. And those walls tell you who's in charge. At sunrise, a temple wall seems to breathe. Figures stride in measured ranks. Color hides in carved shadows, and the glyphs lift their voices. They praise gods and crown pharaohs, but they also decide which reality you meet. So reading a wall means reading a plan. The king is introduced not once, but 5 times. A falconed Horus name promises protection. The 2 ladies bind him to Upper and Lower Egypt. Golden Horus claims endurance. A cartouche throne name speaks with the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt. A cartouched birth name ties him to Ra, not a biography, an architecture of authority. Each line folds the ruler into order, making kingship feel inevitable. Scenes that look like news are really performances. The king stretches cord to fix a temple's first lines, offers Mot to affirm cosmic balance, runs the Sedfest to renew strength, smites bound enemies beneath a raised mace. This is the ancient world's public relations machine. If a year brings drought or defeat, the stone refuses to acknowledge it. It locks in the official story, the state-approved version of reality. You don't just carve a victory, you erase the possibility of defeat from the permanent record. Gods tower over humans, and their words trail from their mouths as tidy banners, as if divinity continually endorses the script. But the script can be revised, so the stone becomes an editor. A loop of rope around royal names seems protective,
almost tender. Yet the cartouche is also a target. A chiseled oval can be scraped clean. Hieroglyphs planed flat. A face made smooth as sky. Verbs get recut, so victories migrate to the current king. That is the quiet shock tucked into the masonry. Absence speaking louder than presence. In other words, if a new king hated the old one, he literally carved the old name out of the stone so history would remember the victory as his. You can trace coups by the scars where names used to be. These surfaces aren't neutral archives. They're billboards, lawsuits, prayers, and battle reports sharing the same stage. The writing makes a promise about how the world should be, and then the building keeps repeating it, day after day, until belief hardens. But once you notice the edits, the smoothed ovals, the altered titles, you hear another voice under the chorus. So the wall stops being a monument and starts being an argument. And Egypt becomes legible as both devotion and strategy.
Egypt can feel sealed behind glass, but a workman's village on the Theban West Bank still talks. In Deir al-Medina, heaps of ostraca, limestone flakes, and broken jars carry inked fragments of daily life. A man lends a cloak and doesn't get it back. A neighbor asks for a tool by morning. A foreman notes rations, loaves, jars of beer, cuts of meat, all neat and practical. The same brush that copies a hymn also writes a reminder, a threat, a thank you. Crew lists read like a wall calendar. Names run down the edge, and next to an absence, the reason appears in quick, honest strokes. Brewing beer. With wife. Scorpion stung. Making offering. Mourning mother. Each line pins a day to a body and a task, making a government project feel as intimate as a shared kitchen. Quarrels arrive hot and cool on the shard. Return my cloak or I will swear by a moon. One lender warns. Another promises to bring a witness. The act of writing slows the pulse. The ink turns heat into record. Not everything is stern. A young hand practices lines from love poetry, comparing a girl to fields after floodwater, to a snare that catches the heart. A scribe's brush drifts into a margin doodle. A cat preening, a lute player mid-strum. Even while drilling determinatives, the mind wanders toward music and pets. Graffiti spreads the same voice across stone. Visitors in the Valley of the Kings and nearby temples leave compact notes. I came. I saw the king's tomb. Signed with pride. Pilgrims sketch little boats and prayers, not as vandalism, but as proof they stood in a charged place and wanted to be counted. Read together, these scraps shrink the distance. The system that crowns a king also tracks sick days and flirts in the margins. The empire resolves into errands, favors, petty grievances, and small joys, the kind that feel familiar in any century.
For 3,000 years, a master taught an apprentice, a priest coached a novice, a foreman corrected a young hand's strokes. Break that chain, and a script goes quiet. Conquests reshaped power, new gods took the stage, and alphabets that promised ease spread along trade routes. Temples kept hieroglyphs alive, but as sanctuaries emptied and funding thinned, the classrooms that mattered most, scribal houses, faltered. Christianity didn't outlaw Egyptian overnight, yet devotion moved toward churches, and copyists poured their labor into new books. Egyptian itself survived in a different outfit, Coptic, written mostly with Greek letters, plus a few signs for stubborn Egyptian sounds. People still prayed and argued and counted in Egyptian, but the art of carving speech into God's pictures drifted out of reach. On an island at the edge of the old world, the light flickered one last time. At Philae, a priest scribe cut a small hieroglyphic text into stone in the year we now call 394. A few decades later, Another hand left the final demotic lines. Then the tools went still. The words didn't die. The teachers did. What remained was stone no one could sound out. Mystery rushed in to fill the silence. Late writers praised hieroglyphs as pure symbols of cosmic truth, not a language at all. A book called the Hieroglyphica, attributed to Apollo, told readers that an image of a goose meant sun, a kneeling figure meant adoration, and on it went. Clever, elegant, and mostly wrong. Centuries later, scholars in Europe produced sweeping translations from single signs, turning short cartouches into Baroque sermons. The most famous was Athanasius Kircher, who could make 10 lines bloom from 2 names. The astonishment is that the last people who truly read the walls stood shoulder to shoulder with those who began to treat them as allegories. One generation still heard sentences, the next heard only symbols. Once that happened, Egypt's own voice stood behind glass, visible everywhere, audible to no one, until a broken stone let listeners back in.
For centuries, scholars argued in circles, turning pictures into allegories and missing the voice beneath. Then a slab of black granodiorite came up from a ruined fort on the Nile, carrying one message in 3 wardrobes: hieroglyphic at the top, demotic in the middle, Greek at the bottom. The text itself wasn't mystical. It was a royal decree: tax breaks for temples, honors for a king, instructions for public display. Ordinary government business, not a spellbook. That was the first surprise. The key to a lost language was bureaucratic. Greek provided a foothold. Read the bottom, and you already know the storyline. Follow it through the demotic, the quick everyday script, and you start to see how Egyptian shapes handle names, titles, and verbs. Then climb to the hieroglyphs, and you notice familiar islands, cartouches encircling royal names. If the Greek praises a ruler named Ptolemy, those rings on the top line must hold the same name, arranged as picture signs. A cartouche doesn't just frame a king, it isolates sounds you can carry across. Match the repeated phrases, such as year X, priests, temples, statues, and patterns begin to lock. A falcon here, a square there, a tethering rope at the end of a word. Not decorations, but recurring parts of a sentence. Names are the first anchors, then titles, then small grammatical habits. The big revelation isn't that pictures can mean ideas. It's that many pictures are letters of a sort, singing consonants, nudged by tiny helper signs that keep meaning on track. The stone is chipped along the edges. Lines are missing, and no side is complete. Even so, repetition rescues the gaps. A phrase broken in hieroglyphs survives in demotic. A lost demotic line reappears in Greek. The decree teaches by redundancy. 3 scripts carry one message to 3 audiences: temple, office, administration. So the same sentence travels 3 roads. Follow all 3, and a silent system starts to speak, not through a single brilliant guess, but through careful matches that turn pictures back into language. If discoveries like this change how you see the ancient world, you'll fit right in with us here at Armchair Archaeology. You can subscribe and stay with us as we keep listening for voices that were almost erased.
By the 1700s and early 1800s, many scholars treated hieroglyphs as pure symbols. A bird stood for soul, a kneeling man for devotion. Beautiful guesses, but they never produced a sentence that matched the Greek on the Rosetta Stone. The cartouches changed the game. Those rope ovals ringed royal names, and names repeat. If the Greek line praises Ptolemy, the matching ovals in the hieroglyphic field must carry the same sounds. Pictures began to behave like letters. Thomas Young stepped onto that trail first. He showed that Demotic wasn't a separate language, but a later, faster script of Egyptian, and he mapped parts of an alphabet for foreign names. In the cartouche for Ptolemy, he spotted recurring values: the square for P, the bread loaf for T, the tethering rope for O, or vowel support, the lion for L, the reed for I. He proved phonetics had a seat at the table, but he still leaned on the idea that phonetics were mostly for Greek names. Jean-François Champollion pushed past that limit. He spoke Coptic, Egypt's last stage, and carried those words in his head as he stared at glyphs. If the sun disk appears in a word, Coptic's Ra or Re explains why. If a scarab sits where to become should be, Coptic Keper confirms the match. He tested Cleopatra's cartouche, then Ramses and Tutmos, and saw that phonetics weren't a special case. Egyptians wrote their own names with sound signs too. That meant grammar, verbs, endings, plurals, could be recovered, not just labels. The moment landed like a drumbeat. In 1822, he burst into his brother's office crying, "Je tiens l'affaire," I've got it, and collapsed from the shock. The code wasn't pictures versus words. It was a system where signs could act as sounds, as words, and as silent guides all at once. Thomas Young opened a door, but Champollion walked through and found the house furnished. Names, sentences, and rules waiting in the dust. From that point on, the walls didn't pose, they spoke.
For a long time, the walls shouted victories, offerings, cosmic order. Once the code opened, the room got quieter and far more crowded. Out stepped scribes with cramped hands, quarry bosses counting baskets of stone, mothers bargaining for bread, a teenager copying a hymn and sneaking a joke in the margin. The big monuments stayed legible, but the pulse returned to the fingertips. Contracts spell out grain loans, temple payrolls, and divorce terms with a lawyerly calm. Wills decide who inherits fields and furniture. Court records preserve cross-examinations where neighbors bicker about donkeys and doorways. School texts march through word lists, then stumble into doodles and love lines the teacher never assigned. Poetry compares a lover to beer at sunrise and fields after floodwater. Hymns weave puns only possible in a writing system where a sign can be a picture, a word, and a sound at the same time. A few surprises reset the story of labor and power. Workmen at Deir el-Medina documented what reads like the first recorded labor strike. Wages late, crews down tools, complaints delivered at a sacred precinct until rations arrive. On another front, a treaty after the Battle of Kadesh appears as formal, duplicated text. A diplomatic promise carved in Egyptian and mirrored in Hittite clay. Stone that once bragged now negotiates. Even medicine and magic come into focus. Prescriptions for burns, spells for scorpion stings, dream books that tell you what last night means for next week. The language doesn't sit on a throne. It rummages through a toolbox. And, yes, an animal pads through these pages, tail high, name poised on the tongue. Say it to call them in from under a chair, and you've already echoed a sound an Egyptian scribe would have recognized. We'll let the finale purr the word aloud, but you've heard it, probably today.
We started with pictures that could sing, followed the brush from papyrus to broken jars, watched kings choreograph eternity on stone, and trailed the teachers until the voice went quiet, then rose again through a chipped decree and a handful of names.
Along the way, the system stopped being art on a wall and became what it always was, a language engine running a civilization from coronations to cloak returns. And that echo we promised? Egyptians named the small hunter at the threshold Miu, and mute for a female, spelled with sound signs and tagged with a neat cat determinative. Say it out loud, Miu, and feel your mouth slide toward meow. Across 3,000 years, the call and answer barely changed. The script that crowned kings also named the purring roommate at your feet. That's the power of decipherment. Not just thrones and treaties, but receipts, love notes, sick day excuses, and a word your own voice still knows. Pictures became language. Language became lives. And the lives feel close enough to speak back.
Drop a comment with your favorite hieroglyph, or the everyday text you'd most want to read now that we can. If this journey surprised you, you can subscribe, leave a super thanks, or just tap like to let the algorithm know this kind of work matters. And check the pinned comment for quiet ways to support future digs, including our Ancient Secrets mug. Until next time, keep questioning, stay curious, and remember, in ancient Egypt, pictures were words, and some of those words still purr.